This is a story from an acquaintance of mine. It happened when he was hiking down a mountain alone. At some point, he started hearing a muttering voice coming from the bushes behind him. He stiffened and turned around, only to see something that looked like a monkey emerge from a gap in the bushes. It was about the size and shape of a monkey, but its face was that of a middle-aged man. He said it was walking upright, just like a human. In his state of shock, he heard the creature's muttering reach his ears. Takumi, Isamu, Masayuki, Kenji, Akira. The monkey was muttering male names one after another. One of them was his father's name. When he reacted slightly, the monkey stopped muttering and approached him with an unpleasant grin. "No, that's my father's name," he instinctively denied with all his might. The monkey glared at him with a terrifying look. After a brief staring contest, the monkey turned away and went back into the bushes. He said he ran down to the foot of the mountain without looking back. I wonder what would have happened if his own name had been guessed at that time. This is a story I heard from a relative about my grandmother, who has since passed away. It happened 60 to 70 years ago, before the war. My grandmother, who was probably around 20 years old at the time, was hospitalized to give birth to her first child. In the bed next to her was a young girl, about 10 years old, who had been in the hospital for a long time. I heard that she and my grandmother got along well. The girl was apparently hospitalized for an eating disorder or some nutritional problem, but the details are unclear now. One night, as my grandmother was lying in her hospital bed, suddenly the window opened, and a strange black creature about the size of a cat, looking something like a monkey, came in. It was making a harsh, raspy croak like that of a raven as it climbed onto my grandmother's bed. Frightened, my grandmother grabbed the rosary she always kept with her and started desperately chanting Buddhist prayers. She prayed thinking, "Don't bother me or my unborn child." But whether it was due to fear or because of that creature, she couldn't raise her voice, she said. The creature kept making that harsh, raspy croak and stayed on my grandmother's bed for a while. After some time, without doing anything else and leaving nothing but fear behind, it jumped off the bed and leaped onto the bed where the long-term hospitalized girl was sleeping. It kept making that ominous, raspy croak and lingered in the hospital room. The creature apparently stayed in the room for several hours, but eventually it went out through the window and disappeared. My grandmother confirmed that the creature had left, and after watching for a while, felt a wave of exhaustion and fell asleep. The next day, the girl in the next bed had died. She had been fine the night before, with no noticeable changes, but overnight she had weakened unbelievably and passed away. During her lifetime, she told this story about the small black monster to several people. I heard this story from one of those people, my aunt. Looking back on that time, my grandmother reportedly said that it might have been the god of death, but whether it was really the god of death, some mysterious creature, or an evil spirit, we'll never know for sure. I find myself thinking, if such a creature really exists, maybe it's some kind of alien or an undiscovered species. But what do you all think? What could this small black monster be? If you see a monkey in the mountains, cover your eyes and run. I live on an island, and this is a story from there. It's a place with nothing but mountains and sea. Since I was little, the old folks always told us, never go to the mountains alone. If you see a monkey in the mountains, cover your eyes and run. Then come tell us immediately. I've never seen a monkey there, but I think I've heard something that sounds like one. Actually, as I found out when I got older, there are no monkeys on this island. One time, a dog was found impaled on a 23-foot-tall steel tower near our house. My parent discovered it and started frantically calling everyone around. We have a public address system that broadcasts messages to every household in town. It usually plays messages like, "Let's do our best today," in the morning, and "Thank you for your hard work today," in the evening, broadcasted from the town office. But that day, the broadcast was different. I can't remember the exact words, but it said something like, "Make sure to lock your doors securely. Absolutely do not go out after 9 p.m. Don't let any light leak outside, and be sure to hang some kind of fish at your front door. I was in the higher grades of elementary school at the time, and I remember being too excited to sleep in our usually boring countryside, finally having some stimulation. I asked my parents and grandparents all sorts of questions, but they brushed me off and wouldn't tell me anything. Usually I sleep alone in my room, but that night all four of us, my parents, my sibling, and I, slept in the same room. After everyone fell asleep, I still couldn't. So I went to the toilet in the middle of the night. We were told not to turn on the lights, so I walked down the hallway in the dark and made it to the toilet. But out of habit, I turned on the light in the toilet. The moment I did, blood-curdling low growls and high-pitched screams erupted from outside. I ran back to the room screaming. My parent woke up and hugged me while chanting something that sounded like a prayer. The next day I was made to skip school, and my grandpa took me to a temple where my head was shaved. I remember my grandpa saying, "Getting your head shaved is a small price to pay for hearing that thing's voice." When I went to school the day after, I laughed because several others had also gotten their heads shaved. Now I live on the mainland, away from the island. But even now, when I ask about what happened back then, no one will tell me anything. According to my grandpa, "You're someone who left the island. That thing must be kept only within this island. It's like a kind of curse, you see." This happened when I was in the lower grades of elementary school. It was around Obon, and my parents had some business to attend to, so I was left in the care of my grandpa for a while. Grandpa's house was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains. There was absolutely nothing to do in that remote area. He lived there with Grandma in that isolated countryside. At first, I was anxious about living away from my parents, but I soon got used to it. Once I did, rural life turned out to be surprisingly fun, but there were scary things too. When night fell, it got pitch black all around. That was frightening. So when it got dark, I didn't want to be alone at all. I always tried to stay close to Grandpa and Grandma. They seemed to understand and made sure I was never left alone. Grandpa would wait outside the bathroom door until I finished bathing, and when it was time to sleep, they laid out the futons so that I was in the middle between them. One night, as usual, I was sleeping between Grandpa and Grandma. I woke up to the sound of a futon being flipped open. I glanced sideways and saw Grandpa getting up and slowly leaving the room. Must be going to the toilet. I could hear Grandpa's footsteps heading towards the bathroom. In the dim fluorescent light, I was about to pull the covers over myself to go back to sleep when my eyes fell on the hanging scroll of Master Jongkui displayed in the alcove. For those of you who don't know, Master Jongkui is like a guardian deity in our culture. Master Jongkui's large, bulging eyes moved and glared at me. Paralyzed by the intensity of that gaze, I then saw a hairy, thick arm stretch out from the scroll towards my head. It tapped me on the head with the scabbard of the sword it was holding. That was my limit. I screamed, "Ooh-ah!" and jumped up from under the covers. "What? What happened?" With a clatter, Grandpa hurried back into the room. Grandma also woke up in a panic and turned on the lights. I explained what had happened to Grandpa and Grandma. I told them that Master Jongkui from the alcove had tapped me on the head. "Ah, I see. Wait a moment." Grandpa took down the hanging scroll from the alcove. I was so scared that while Grandpa was putting away the scroll, I kept hugging Grandma and made sure not to look at the alcove. After he finished cleaning up, I decided to sleep in the same futon with Grandpa and Grandma. I was scared, but I couldn't fight off sleep. I quickly drifted off. The next day, Grandpa was really angry. "How dare it hit Masao's precious head? We must teach it a lesson." Saying that, Grandpa took me out to the garden. Grandma was there, tending to a small charcoal brazier. "Masao, sit there." After seeing me sit on the porch, Grandpa went back into the house. When he returned, he was holding a frying pan and the rolled-up hanging scroll. "Watch closely, Masao. Grandpa's going to teach it a lesson." Grandpa went out to the garden, placed the frying pan on the brazier, and threw some chopped chili peppers into it. As black smoke rose from the smoldering peppers, Grandpa held the rolled-up scroll in the rising smoke. Cough, cough. A small sound came from the scroll. It sounded like coughing. As the rising smoke gained strength, turning into a fierce black cloud, the coughing sound also grew louder. Cough! Cough! Suddenly, the rolled-up scroll began to tremble up and down rapidly, and something like a long, gray-haired creature came out of the scroll's hole. It fell onto the frying pan with a plop, then jumped up with a bounce and scurried off somewhere in a great hurry. Masao, did you see that? Grandpa looked at me, sitting on the porch. I nodded my head several times. A weasel came to play tricks. It's all right now. This will teach it not to come again. Grandpa stood up and unfurled the scroll with a flourish. The image of Master Jongkui that I thought I had seen last night wasn't there. Instead, the scroll now depicted a common scene: 2 cranes and a sun. That mischievous weasel had transformed itself into the image of Master Jongkui and entered the world inside the scroll. Grandpa explained. Impersonating Master Jongkui is such a wicked act. That's why it got what it deserved. Grandpa said that and laughed together with Grandma. As for me, I was so dumbfounded by what had just happened that all I could do was stare blankly. It's a nostalgic story now. I might have forgotten some details, but this is pretty much how it went. This is a story from my friend. It happened when he went camping with a group of buddies. Late at night, everyone else had fallen asleep, and he was the only one left by the fire. As he was fighting back yawns, thinking maybe it was time to put out the fire and go to sleep himself, an unfamiliar voice spoke to him. "What are you doing?" He looked up and saw someone sitting on the other side of the fire. It was a large black shadow that he could only see vaguely, as if there was a haze over his vision. For some reason at that moment, he didn't find it strange or scary, and just answered normally. I'm keeping watch over the fire." Who this person was, why they were in such a place at this hour, these kinds of questions didn't even cross his mind. He should have been wide awake until just a moment ago, but his thoughts weren't working properly, like when you're half asleep. As he was vaguely wondering if he was dozing off, the voice spoke to him again. "What will you do if that fire goes out?" It won't go out. It must be pitch black out here in the mountains. Can't see a thing beyond your nose." Yeah, if this fire went out, I guess it would be like that. The darkness is deep. You never know what might be lurking in it. Darkness is scary. That's why I have to keep watch over the fire." The owner of the voice kept insistently suggesting that he put out the fire. "Why don't you stop watching the fire? You must be sleepy. Just go to sleep, nice and deep." I'd like to, but I can't do that." "Shall I put it out for you?" No thanks." "I'm going to put it out. But I'll just light it again right away. I don't like the dark." "A fire that's gone out once won't light again so easily. It's pointless. Just go to sleep." But I have a lighter. If there's a spark, it'll light quickly." "A lighter, huh? So you can light a fire quickly with that?" I think so. It's easy enough to start a forest fire." Then the voice started begging for the lighter. "If the fire won't go out, you don't need the lighter anymore, right? Give it to me." This is important, so I can't." "I'll keep watch over the fire for you. So give me the lighter." It's not mine, so I really can't." This back and forth went on for who knows how long. Eventually, there was a sense that the shadow was rising to its feet. "If the fire won't go out, there's nothing I can do. I guess I'll head back. Let's play again sometime." With those final words, something retreated into the darkness of the mountains. So bye. As he was saying goodbye to the fading presence, he was suddenly shaken violently. He tensed up, startled, only to find it was one of his friends who had been sleeping earlier. As soon as their eyes met, his friend interrogated him with incredible intensity. "What the hell were you just talking to?" "What do you mean, huh?" At that point, his thoughts finally cleared, and he could think clearly again. "Wait, was I just having a conversation with something? Wasn't I dreaming?" When he looked around, he saw that everyone else had poked their heads out of their tents and were staring at him fearfully. The one who had shaken him awake explained what happened. Apparently, he had woken up because he heard voices outside the tent. At first, he thought it was annoying that someone was talking in the middle of the night, but when he checked the sleeping faces in the tent, he turned pale. As far as he could tell from the number of people, there should only be one person outside. When he nervously peeked outside, he saw two shadows sitting across the campfire. One was definitely my friend, but he couldn't tell what the other one was. It looked like a black mass in the shape of a person. My friend and the shadow were exchanging words over and over, almost obsessively. It seemed they were arguing about whether to put out the fire or not. He watched the unfolding scene with a silent prayer that the fire wouldn't be extinguished. Soon the shadow stood up and disappeared into the depths of the mountains. By then, everyone else had woken up and was holding their breath behind him. When the shadow vanished, there was a collective sigh of relief inside the tent. Right after that, they rushed out of the tent, grabbed my friend who was staring at the fire as if possessed, and shook him violently to wake him up. That's what he was told. Involuntarily, he found himself staring into the darkness in the direction where the shadow had disappeared. There was no sign of movement. All he could hear was the crackling of firewood at his feet. After that, they made sure never to let the fire go out until they left the mountain. They say they set up two-person fire watches, taking turns to watch over the fire. Thanks to that, apparently, the black shadow never appeared again. I wonder what I was talking to at that time. He says it still gives him goosebumps when he remembers it. On the Ome Highway, just past Okutama and a bit before the well-known Uiran-Buchi, there's a confluence of rivers. A tributary called Ichino's River joins the mainstream there, and for a while after that junction, it flows through what's called a gorge, more like a river running between vertical cliffs than a valley. There was this guy named Machia who mainly enjoyed mountain stream fishing. He thought, the less accessible a place is to people, the better the fishing must be. So despite warnings, he entered the river at the confluence and started fishing. But he wasn't catching anything at all. With high rock walls on both sides, it was hard to get out of the river, so he reluctantly continued upstream. The Ichino's River has several more tributaries, and one called Otsunagai Valley flows into it. It's known as a good fishing spot and popular for river climbing. But it's a treacherous place. It's called a bad valley because quite a few fatal accidents have occurred there due to falls and such. Although it was a good spot, Machia judged it too dangerous to go alone. There was also a place to enter and exit the river at this confluence, so he was thinking about moving to a different river. But for some reason, from this point on, he suddenly started catching fish, and good-sized ones at that. The river ahead became a gorge again, but he decided to continue fishing up the Ichino's River. The fishing remained excellent. Midway, there was a 10-foot waterfall, and he caught his best fish of the day there, which made him very happy. Hoping for an even bigger catch, he climbed over the waterfall. That's when he noticed someone ahead of him upstream. The person was using a bamboo rod, and their technique looked skillful at a glance. But their outfit was bizarre, a suit with business shoes and a hunting cap. Still, his fishing skills were remarkable, catching fish one after another. Usually you'd gradually move upstream and change spots. But this man in the suit kept fishing in the same place without moving at all. In mountain stream fishing, it's considered bad manners to overtake someone ahead of you. But if the person ahead isn't moving, you can ask permission to go ahead. Machia felt quite creeped out, but to ask permission to enter the upstream area, he called out, "Hello, that was a nice fish you caught just now." At that time, the man in the suit was crouching with his back to Machia, seemingly removing a hook or something. "It must be over 12 inches. You're very skilled," Machia continued, but the man remained silent, still crouching. Thinking the man might be hard of hearing, Machia moved to the man's right side to be in his field of vision. But the man turned his face away, refusing to look at Machia. However, Machia could see what the man was doing. He was stuffing fish into a glass jar for specimens. Not just one or two, but so many that the fish were losing their shape. Realizing this wasn't normal, Machia decided to avoid getting involved. He just said, "Excuse me," and passed by the man. The man kept his back turned to Machia as he moved, still refusing to show his face, but he seemed to continue stuffing fish into the jar. After walking about 33 feet, Machia looked back out of curiosity, but the man had vanished. The rock walls on both sides were nearly 33 feet high, and there was a waterfall downstream. It wasn't a place where one could easily leave the river. Later at a drinking party with fellow anglers, Machia met a veteran angler known as the Man of Okutama. This person had explored even the tiniest streams and valleys in the area and had even written magazine columns. When Machia told him about the man in the suit, the veteran angler just mumbled, "So you saw him too?" This is a story from when I was in 5th grade of elementary school. I've never had an experience like this before or since. Given the nature of what happened, some people might not believe me, but I'm sure I saw it. I wasn't the only one who saw it. I was walking along a mountain trail following my dad. It was summer. Dusk was closing in around us. My dad, an expert mountaineer who had seen his fair share of strange things in the wilderness, was leading the way. So although I was tired, I wasn't scared. The only sounds I could hear were our footsteps, the rustling of trees, some kind of bird calls, and the sound of a river flowing through the valley. Or at least that's what I thought. But mixed in with those sounds, I thought I heard something like a human voice. At first, I figured it might just be the sound of the river, which can sometimes sound like voices. But the more I focused on it, the more it sounded unmistakably like a human voice. "Dad, can't you hear someone's voice?" "Who could it be? What are they saying?" "Just keep walking." I walked on in silence as I was told, but I couldn't shake the voice from my mind. Where was it coming from? As I walked looking around nervously, I saw something moving in the river at the bottom of the valley. There was quite a distance from the trail to the valley floor, and there were lots of trees and grass in between. Plus, it was getting dark, so you wouldn't expect to be able to see clearly if something was there. And yet I could see the figure clearly. It had a shaved head. Despite the considerable distance between us, it was moving in parallel with us, as if following along the valley floor as we walked the trail. The bald-headed figure kept following us as it walked along the valley floor. It was shouting at us, "Hey, come over here!" It kept repeating the same phrase over and over, laughing loudly. That alone was strange enough, but the man's appearance was odd too. The clothes he wore were strangely old-fashioned, like something a farmer would wear in an old Japanese historical drama. His face wore a broad grin, but his eyes were in the wrong place. His head was oddly lumpy too, and he was moving at quite a speed. The valley floor was full of rough stones and rocks, but he walked as if they weren't there at all. Besides, how could I see him so clearly when it was so dark and he was so far away? Or rather, wasn't that person glowing white? Even as a grade schooler, I noticed how strange it was, and I couldn't help but stop in my tracks. "Don't look! Keep walking!" My dad's sharp command snapped me back to reality. Suddenly, I was terrified, but being scared wouldn't help. After that, I just focused on walking. All the while, from the valley floor, I could still hear that voice calling to us, laughing loudly. Before I knew it, my dad and I had left the mountain trail and come out onto a road wide enough for vehicles to pass. By then, I couldn't hear the voice anymore. In the car on the way back, my dad talked about that man. Until about 7 or 8 years ago, that thing used to appear several times, but we hadn't seen it for a long time after that, so I thought it was gone for good. I didn't think you'd see it. It just calls out and doesn't do any harm, and if you ignore it, nothing happens. But if you listen to what it says and go down to the valley floor, who knows what might happen? It probably calls out to people like that because it's lonely, with no family to pray for its peace and no home or grave to return to. I think that was the gist of what he said. I've been to that area several times since then, but I've never met that man again. I wonder if he's finally found peace.